Dave Brusca here, and today I want to talk about the DJI Osmo Pocket. I'll give you my opinion on this, but first let me give you an overview of this camera and its specs. So what is this thing? Well, it's a 3-axis, right? 1, 2, 3-axis stabilized camera that is very, very small, hence the Pocket name. And, well, the image sensor is a half-inch, roughly a half-inch 12 megapixel sensor. The lens on it is f2 and is a 135 full frame equivalent of 26 millimeter when you're looking at field of view. So it's not super wide, but it's decently wide. The ISO range of it is 100 to 3200, which is not massive, but it's good enough for most situations. There's a tiny touch screen on the back of this thing that obviously gives you a confidence monitor so you can check your framing, etc., but also allows you to control the camera, changing white balance, exposure settings, different mode settings, things like that. And actually, through firmware updates, it's been getting more and more functionality, which is great. Now, this can record 4K in 24, 25, 48, 50, and 60 frames per second. And it can record full HD in all of those frame rates plus 120, which is pretty great. So the bit rate of this thing is 100 megabits per second, and it records to H.264 files. Now obviously these files work natively in iOS and with Android, so editing on those devices is actually pretty seamless. It's got a USB-C port on the bottom, which I'll get to in a bit, and it's got this removable and changeable, adaptable, whatever you want to call it, piece that essentially is Lightning or USB-C that allows you to connect direct to a phone and use the phone, the app on the phone rather, to control the camera and to monitor, to see what the camera is seeing. And this gives you a much larger and higher resolution screen than what is on the camera itself. So how stable is this thing? Well, for the price, very stable, and for the size especially. So what I kind of mean by all of this is it's more stable, substantially more stable than the camera on my iPhone XS. It's more stable than my Panasonic G9, which I'm using to record this. It's not more stable than either of those cameras when you put them on the DJI Osmo Mobile or the Ronin S. The downside to doing that with those two cameras is that they are larger and heavier systems. They take up a lot more space in your bag than this little thing does. Also, when you put your phone on the Osmo Mobile, you can't necessarily point the camera side to you, or the main camera, which is a higher quality camera, to you and see what you're getting. So this little screen on the back of this is very useful for that. How does this compare to the GoPro Hero 7? Well, I don't want to say too much about that. There's been plenty of tests on this and different videos out there. But what I will say is that gimbal stabilization is better than electronic stabilization. And what I mean by that is you can always add electronic stabilization to the video in post. And honestly, the electronic stabilization that's happening in camera is happening in post, just in the camera and not at the computer. Most of the time that I've seen videos where people have claimed that the electronic stabilized camera is better than the gimbal camera, every time I look at the footage, all I see is all the specular highlights just freaking out and going all over the place. They're shaking like crazy, where the stabilized camera doesn't have that problem at all. And what they seem to get a lot of is the movement sway, which again, you could mitigate some of that with digital stabilization in post. So that's where I'm gonna leave that one. So what about image quality? Well, what I found is in terms of detail, noise, and color accuracy, it's actually pretty substantially better than what's on my phone. It's not as good in any of those categories as my G9, but it's pretty close in the amount of detail and color accuracy, which is great, especially for me being able to use them both in the same video. But obviously the G9 has better noise control, and as you get a larger sensor, like a full frame sensor, the A7S II or the A7Rs, the Nikon Z series, etc., you're going to get even better noise control in the camera. The dynamic range is not all that great, and I would put it as somewhere around the same as my phone. It's decent, it's good enough. And honestly, that's the key. It's good enough for most things. There is a log profile on this, but I haven't found it to be very useful. It doesn't really give you any added latitude in your highlights, which is where I typically would want extra latitude, but it does give you a little bit more. So if you're in a very contrasty situation and you're finding it's just not quite enough, you can throw the log profile on there, which in the camera they call it cine look or something along those lines. Throw that on there, and it's pretty easy to grade. It doesn't require all kinds of heavy color shifting in post. You could throw a basic LUT on there. So what don't I like about this camera? Well, as I said, there's something about this port, right? Well, for one, there's no mic jack on this thing. And granted, it's very small and adding a mic jack would increase the size, but it seems to me that, especially because they put this port here, specifically, DJI is assuming that the intended market for this camera, who is vloggers, as they say, don't use external microphones. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you could get their adapter and plug in, right? It's a USB-C to TRRS adapter, and allows you to plug in a lav like the one that I'm using here, which is great. And that's super useful, especially if you are walking around and you're shooting yourself. But let's say you want to put this on a tripod. Well, the big problem with that, and I'm going to go off topic for a moment here, the big problem with that is there's no quarter 20 on the bottom. You can't mount this directly to a tripod. That's infuriating. So I assume that they assumed that no, they never use a tripod. Nobody will use a tripod with this thing. Now you can get the wireless module, which goes back here. It takes this USB port and actually puts it out the back, which is useful. But that piece doesn't have a quarter 20 on it either, even though there might be enough space to make that happen with it. No, doesn't do it. Also kind of, okay, well, they've got what they call an action cam accessory mount, which is essentially a GoPro mount that attaches onto it, but attaches on to like right here. And if you were to use what is relatively readily available out there, the little tripod adapter for a GoPro or action camera, on that piece, that accessory, it ends up right here, so you're mounted on your tripod like this. It just won't sit upright. And yeah, you get this to go forward, but oh man, that is such a tight shot. It's difficult to use that way. Now, if you could get an extended one, you run the risk of blocking this USB port, which again is needed for the little microphone adapter piece, and it's big. It's not like the Apple one where it's a little dongle and then a little piece of cable and then the little piece to plug, the port to plug the head or mic jack into. No, it's huge. It sticks out quite a bit. So it requires extra accommodation for it, which is kind of a pain. So those things kind of combined, it's definitely not great on a tripod. Now you could get it on a tripod officially with their selfie stick, which is, it's basically like this cage wraps around the camera and then it has a stick at the bottom of it is $1/4 $20. But then you end up with this really tall thing sticking on your tripod just to get this thing to mount on it. It's crazy. So what are my workarounds? Well, for one, for the audio, what I've been doing, because you can't actually use third-party dongles because the firmware has to support the USB-C to TRS adapter, and they only really support their own. There's been claims of people saying that they're able to work it with some random third-party ones, but every one of those that I'm testing, everyone I've tested, it hasn't worked. So I don't know what they're doing special to make that happen, but it's not intuitive. And maybe a lot of them work now, especially due to firmware updates, which have come out since the USB-C dongle, but again, the ones that I have still don't work. So what I've been doing for audio is actually been going into my phone with my lav and syncing it in post. Not ideal, but it's fine. Okay, so what about mounting this to the tripod? Well, my solution has been this, a super clamp. So these actually have $1/4 $20 right there. And another one, once you unscrew this, right here, which I can mount my tripod plate on here or here, depending on how I'm going to do it, but lately I've been using this. And then I put the camera right here and I clamp it down. And if I needed to, I could give it just enough space to have the little dongle stick out of it. And that's basically it. My problem with this is bulky and a lot heavier than this is. In fact, this is probably as heavy as my G9 is. So I'm not actually saving myself size or weight in a camera bag if I'm going to be mounting this to a tripod. Which I would want that occasionally. If I'm only using this for vlogging, I would still want the ability to mount it to a tripod every once in a while. It just seems absurd. Like most of the vlog style videos I watch on YouTube are a little bit more like this, where it's a camera set up and they're talking to it. They're not purely holding the camera. So I don't know, but obviously there's a lot more out there, and the really popular thing is definitely all handheld, but a lot of that is handheld by somebody else, so it doesn't quite matter so much. I don't know, I'm getting off topic. The point is, who is this for and would I recommend it? I don't know who it's for. I'm gonna say, ultimately, what I find this to be the most useful for is a second or third camera to just throw in your bag and forget about. Get the shots, the dynamic motion shots. With this, keeping yourself run and gun. If you've got a really run and gun package where it's essentially a camera, like a mirrorless camera or DSLR or whatever, and a few lenses, maybe a tripod, maybe a light to go on top of the camera, maybe a microphone, right? All these things, throw this in there as well, get some added smooth motion shots to throw in, just to kind of sprinkle in, add a little bit of flair to your video. Don't worry about audio on it. Don't worry about syncing it. Just, it's B-roll, right? This is fantastic for that. It's good enough image quality. Again, I would say it's better image quality than the phone, which some would say is not saying much, but I think it kind of is, because the quality of the cameras on phones these days has been getting phenomenally high. So good enough image quality. It's very stable, especially for its size. Yeah, you could go more stable, but man, this is, especially for the price, oh, it's convenient for that kind of thing. And the price is phenomenal for what this thing is capable of doing. So yeah, I would recommend it. Are there problems? Are there workarounds that will be odd and infuriating? Yes. But that's, I don't know. That's where I'm going to end it, because I don't know where to take this review from there. I feel like there are a few things they could do better, and maybe they'll have a version 2 that, oh my god, has a quarter 20 on the bottom and has the USB-C sticking out the back or whatever already, or I don't know. Maybe they'll have that stuff. I don't see it happening in the next year, and possibly not even in 2 years. But only time will tell on that stuff. And ultimately, those are reasons why, you know, those are things that I don't like with it, but obviously anybody's going to have their own things they like or don't like about it. And in fact, I want to hear what you like or don't like about the Osmo Pocket. If you have one, if you used one, has this review been useful to you? If you're thinking about buying one, let me know in the comments down below. And please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.